It's interesting. I mean, you brought up a couple of, good nuggets that I take away. I mean, I like the fact that, you leaned into the internship, you had an opportunity. And I think a lot of us, I don't think anybody gets there, right, on your own. I think doors get opened, opportunities are presented. I think it's up to us to lean into that or to back off, in that kind of free will sense. You can do it or not do it. But the fact that you leaned into it, you got that good exposure and saw that it really aligned with kind of, I think, what you're looking for long-term. I mean, that's really fascinating. And that's something that you did pretty early.
Yeah.
Great piece of advice,
Yeah, I definitely think, getting out there as a young engineer and getting to see different environments is good, because you can realize what aligns with your natural strengths and
right.
what doesn't. And for me, already feeling, the leading to be in a business leadership role, it was really exciting for me getting to work those entry level jobs. I know it's not necessarily glamorous. It's probably not what engineers think of, but whether it was me doing basic AutoCAD drafting, or it was sitting hours on end in a print room sorting map books, could have been one of the most boring and mundane things a person has the opportunity to do. And yet I would try to make it fun. I would set a timer for myself to see how quickly I could pace through things. But the thing that made me excited the whole time was that I was getting to see from ground zero, how the whole system worked, how the whole, entity of the organization functioned, delivered its services. And so it was really fun for me, knowing that I wanted to, be in a leadership role in the future, to get the chance to work various roles that a lot of times an engineer would never touch, because you would come in above that in just the hierarchy. But it was really great to have been in the trenches and seen all those different pieces fit together.
Yeah. I'm so glad you brought that up. I talked a little bit about on a previous podcast. We talked a little bit about that with a guest, that ability to kind of see some things at that entry level and experience them for what they are, but how they support and strengthen, kind of like the rebar on the concrete. I mean, it builds a stronger foundation. And I've always been a kind of an outspoken proponent too. I think some of the best engineers have done two things: that they've done the entry level stuff, or they've spent some time in the field. It brings what would you say, a creativity, an experience, even a bit of a wisdom, if you will, to the way in which they solve complex problems.
Welcome to the Energigenius Podcast with Joe Patch IV.
All right, I want to welcome everyone back to another episode of the Energigenius Podcast. I'm excited to be here today. I've got a fantastic guest. You guys are going to get a ton out of today's show. Trust me. I've had many conversations with Jeremiah, and it's always good. So today's guest is Jeremiah Bridges. He's the CEO of Cross Discipline Engineering. It's like a boutique engineering consulting firm that specializes in line and station design. So he's in the power space. We're going to get into all things power, engineering, consulting, and really what makes this firm unique. I think these guys are fixing to blow up here over the next year. They've done some amazing work to date. I think the sky is the limit. So I'm super excited to have you on today, Jeremiah, to kind of get your philosophies, your insights, talk a little bit about the work. So I think we're going to have a good show. I appreciate you making time to be with us.
I appreciate the opportunity, Joe. Excited to be here.
Thank you. Well, I always like to kind of kick it off from the beginning here. I always like to ask that question: what got you into it? Why engineering? And then, why line station design? Why power? I mean, it's a two-step question, but kind of bring us, how did you get to where you are, from the very beginning?
Yeah. Okay. I can do that. So back when I was in high school, I knew, prayed about where to go to school, what was I going to do for a career, and felt very clear that the answer was engineering. Had really no question about that. It's interesting, my degrees probably shifted focus in time, but I knew engineering was the route. After having prayed about it, felt like there was a point somewhere in the future of my career that I was going to use, my God-given gifts, talents, being decent with math, maybe not spelling, but those sort of things, that those skills would come together. But it was actually more ultimately in a business leading capacity. It wasn't only just for the technical side of engineering, but for using that skill to make a difference beyond just solving equations and things like that. But
Sure.
definitely knew engineering was where it's supposed to be. So from there, it started unfolding. So it looks like you got a question. Go ahead.
No. I was going to say, no, that's great. I mean, you prayed about it. I love it. You had real clarity going in. Obviously you're playing into your strengths, and we'll talk a little bit more later in the show about how, started off as an engineer, and then obviously the CEO of your own company today. And, your role is obviously very different. Problems and challenges you're solving are obviously very different than the kind of the rank and file engineer, for sure. Why this particular space? This is, as an engineer, you can go lots of places, do lots of different things, all fascinating, but you chose this niche. What brought you into the niche?
So really that was probably just the relationships and connections that I had at the time that I think God definitely used to kind of guide the path. Because in my mind, the space I saw was probably in the aerospace field. I liked the cool technology and and envisioned being in a Boeing or Lockheed or someplace like that, working on high-end sophisticated technology. But
Sure.
At the same time, that really, as I matured and got older, I saw it didn't align with the totality of being more in the small business space. Okay. and being a leader that could make some of the differences I wanted to make. And so I had the blessing and opportunity to work in a power system consulting firm right out of high school. I worked as a drafter and just did some basic entry level things, and that just came because I had an opportunity. Knew someone I went to school with whose dad was a partner in a firm, and got me that entry level role. Well, that then unfolded to me seeing the power space for several years. I actually took an internship and worked at Boeing, and it was a great internship. But it was something that once I realized, like, oh, this is not going to give the future outcome that I'm really feeling led to, and it was so big. It was one of those things that just, it was amazing, and I still look back fondly on getting to be there and see the things I saw, but I also realized immediately that I love being in that small power consulting environment and getting to see the totality of projects from start to finish, and be much more involved in the whole operations of the business, rather than thousands of people working towards that one project in a company that was tens and hundreds of thousands of people.
Right. It's interesting. I mean, you brought up a couple of good nuggets that I take away. I mean, I like the fact that you leaned into the internship, you had an opportunity. And I think a lot of us, I don't think anybody gets there, right, on your own. Doors get opened, opportunities are presented. I think it's up to us to lean into that or to back off, in that kind of free will sense. You can do it or not do it. But the fact that you leaned into it, you got that good exposure and saw that it really aligned with kind of, I think, what you're looking for long-term. I mean, that's really fascinating. And that's something that you did pretty early. I great piece of advice,
Yeah, I definitely think, getting out there as a young engineer and getting to see different environments is good, because you can realize what aligns with your natural strengths and what doesn't. And for me, already feeling, the leading to be in a business leadership role, it was really exciting for me getting to work those entry level jobs. I know it's not necessarily glamorous. It's probably not what engineers think of, but whether it was me doing basic AutoCAD drafting, or it was sitting hours on end in a print room sorting map books, could have been one of the most boring and mundane things a person has the opportunity to do. And yet I would try to make it fun. I would set a timer for myself to see how quickly I could pace through things. But the thing that made me excited the whole time was that I was getting to see from, ground zero, how the whole system worked, how the whole, entity of the organization functioned, delivered its services. And so it was really fun for me, knowing that I wanted to, be in a leadership role in the future, to get the chance to work various roles that a lot of times an engineer would never touch. Because you would come in above that in just the hierarchy. But it was really great to have been in the trenches and seen all those different pieces fit together.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up. I talked a little bit about on a previous podcast. We talked a little bit about that with a guest, that ability to kind of see some things at that entry level and experience them for what they are, but how they support and strengthen, kind of like the rebar on the concrete. I mean, it builds a stronger foundation. And I've always been a kind of an outspoken proponent too. I think some of the best engineers have done two things: that they've done the entry level stuff, or they've spent some time in the field. It brings what would you say, a creativity, an experience, even a bit of a wisdom, if you will, to the way in which they solve complex problems. That you're right, you come in at a level that's a little too high. you lack some of those skill sets and insights that can be, I think, quite frankly, indispensable. So the fact that you had that, and I think it's a great lesson though too. You look at, hopefully part of what this podcast does is, give insight to your genius, give insight to the experience of all of our guests. But I think that as you're younger, starting your career, it's easy to want to step over or sidestep what are the experiences you have garnered. But that's precisely what's helped you, become the CEO of your own company today, and to be the leader and the visionary that you are for your firm, and to be able to see the growth you've seen over the last 8 years. And I'm projecting some phenomenal growth, over the next couple of years. It's all built on those experiences. So you skip those, and then I guess there's a price to be paid for that too, huh?
Yeah. And it's interesting even to look back in some hindsight of how things unfolded, and the timing, the patience at times that it may have taken to, I had a lot of time learning basics, but they were, almost invaluable. And as I, just in the last couple of years, working with fellow colleagues and thinking about how we help develop and grow our team and develop young EIs into PEs, and whether it's engineers or whether it's our designers, it doesn't matter who you are on the cross-disciplinary team. We're all a team of professionals, and our aim is to build and develop our team to their fullest potential. And in that, we came across a Dreyfus 5-stage model. I don't know if you've ever heard of that. It's 5 stages of skills acquisition, and it's been used in different industries, but it talks about a progression from novice all the way up to expert, and it comes in 5 stages. And there's a blog that came out in kind of the programming IT tech world, where their whole topic was the rise of the advanced beginner, where the beginner is really kind of the second step past novice, and you gain a lot of knowledge, kind of like a child learning to talk. Like the amount of development that happens in a child between birth to even 3 years old is tremendous. In comparison to what may happen between 7 years old and 17 years old, the scale of growth is faster, but you're still, the whole time you're growing, you're developing. That's kind of the way your professional skill set is. And when you get in and you make some really big leaps, what the whole article describes is this tendency to believe that you've actually passed where you're at on the acquisition of knowledge and understanding stage. And pretty soon you become this advanced beginner, and it actually kicks you off on a separate track.
Okay.
And you think you've almost arrived because of how much knowledge you gained in that first space. And then there's a risk that you don't pursue further. You don't realize there's so many things you still don't know. Even now, owning a company, that doesn't make me know any more than anybody else. I just know more than I did last year.
Yeah. That's true. That's true. I appreciate you sharing that. I think there's a lot to be gained. There really is, in taking those steps as they come, kind of extracting the most out of them, and then certainly leveraging as you move forward. But, as they say, right, putting in the reps, that's what gets you to become the expert. And there's no shortcut. I think everybody's looking for the silver bullet. They're all looking for the shortcut. How do I acquire 10 years of experience and knowledge in a week? And it's like, that just doesn't happen. It would be nice, but it's not real. So, and nor would you want it to be, right? Go ahead.
I said only in the Matrix.
Oh, in the Matrix. That's true. Tell us a little bit about, talk about a little bit about the projects that you guys work. We talked about station design, line design, to kind of give the audience a bit of a feel for, this, I like to use the word sandbox, right? The sandbox that you guys are playing in, to give us some kind of idea of what size projects you're taking on and the type of work that you're doing. Yeah, let's go with that.
So, you already mentioned we're in the electric power system space. And so a lot of our clients are the utilities themselves.
Mm-hmm.
At times we may work in an industrial setting or oil and gas, but primarily it's work for utilities themselves.
Okay.
And so in terms of design for a substation, design for a transmission line, and design for distribution lines,
mm-hmm.
we'll take on a very full gamut. We'll work through project planning and
okay.
Permitting requirements, all the way through concept development and site acquisition support. We tend not to be the guys that actually do a lot of direct right-of-way acquisition. We support
okay.
Utilities, and we support those that do, but we're more heavily on the design, what I'll call the design side. But we'll then take the concept, we'll develop 3D models of the project, we'll develop the drawing sets, we'll handle procurement, we'll okay. solicit the quotes for the equipment, we'll evaluate those, we'll do everything to handle shipping logistics, we'll support construction. We don't actually build. We're still totally in the professional services space. Sure. We have teamed up with contractors to provide EPC services. So if it is turnkey that somebody's looking for, we've got the ability to bring that team together. But our specialty is in the design, project management, and I'd say even the relationship management space, because the projects are bigger a lot of times than just the technical piece. Mm-hmm. There's very much a relational piece, and we try to align both sides.
Sure. Okay. I appreciate you sharing that. It kind of helps give a little insight, obviously, to the listener, and kind of the range, certainly of services that you guys offer, to get it's quite a bit. You guys go pretty deep, I think, in this space, and certainly in the region in which you're in. You guys are in the Midwest. Yep. There's certainly a lot of work to be done. What do you think? One of the questions I like to share for kind of the end, but I kind of think it fits now, is, what do you think are some of the challenges, that are coming as we look at, and you can kind of look at it over the next year or two, next 5 years, or even further, kind of go where you want. But as we look at this space, as we look at the transmission distribution system here in the U.S., the aging of the system, what do you think are some of the challenges that need to be solved, and certainly need to be addressed as we're moving into the future? I think there's all kinds of concerns there, personally, that need to be dealt with.
We could probably run the rest of the podcast out in various rabbit trails. One of the things, and I almost hate to repeat some things because it's going to be redundant to other voices in the industry. Sure. And articles you'll read, but the aging workforce in the utility space, and particularly at the utilities, yeah. I think is something that is a challenge that's going to continue to unfold over the next decade. Mm-hmm. As a lot of senior engineers reach a retirement age, and there's a transition of knowledge. A lot of places, I see it in the consulting space, I see it in the utility space, where there's a lot of specialized knowledge that is left inside the heads of those that have come before,
Yep.
but it hasn't completely been transferred into the system or to the next generation. Now, there's no knock on the next generation. Next generation has got tremendous advantages. They've got new technology. They've got additional skills, but there's those things that reside in the back of somebody's mind that is what happened 20 years ago that actually has relevance. What happened 40 years ago that actually has relevance to a decision that needs to be made next year.
Right.
And that is something that the whole industry is continuing to wrestle with, is that knowledge transfer. So that's definitely one area. I think you already hit. I mean, there is a significant amount of aging infrastructure, and that's going to continue. There's going to be more in the realm of cyber security. Inevitably, there's going to be requirements that are going to continue to come into the industry from a regulatory perspective. Every time, I mean, in the last month, we've seen, a hack that shut down, the Colonial Pipeline. Then we saw hacks this week that shut down meat processing. The more times we see hacks, the more we're going to expect regulation and efforts to help curtail that. And I certainly wouldn't claim that the utility grid is at high risk. There is a lot of protocols, a lot of safeguards in place. Sometimes you may turn on the news and it may sound like, oh, every part of our infrastructure is at risk. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying there will be more and more regulation that's going to come into place that will just add complexity to navigate. And so it's a risk. It's a risk that's already being mitigated, but the complexity of it will grow.
Yeah. I like that second insight that you gave. I mean, both insights were very good and certainly have to be dealt with, but I think that second insight was really interesting from the perspective of, the regulatory issues that will come to bear, and the security, that will there already is a lot of security, as a lot of redundancy. I mean, these, for people that are not in the space, and you're right, if you listen to too many talking heads in the news, it can create an unnecessary fear for sure. I mean, yes, there's risk with everything last time I checked, but as you continue to address the potential issues coming down the pipe, right? I mean, you've got to, see what they are, address them in real time and continue to move forward. But the security side, I think, will continue to be a part of that equation, and probably an increasing part of that equation as time moves on. One of the things I want to transition to in the conversation is talk a little bit about, I know you and I have had this talk offline, but talking about, coming in, we talked a little bit about the beginning of being the engineer, doing the engineering. You guys are very consultative focused, and how you run the firm. And so you're obviously at a point now where you're the tip of the spear, you're leading the organization moving forward. And so transitioning from an engineer into more of a business professional, you're the kinds of problems that you're solving are not what rank and file or team leads are solving today. You've got other issues. So I want to maybe talk just a little bit about that. I mean, and I'm thinking to the audience that's watching this that, and they've been an engineer, they've been in the space 10, 15, 20 years, thinking about maybe going on their own or moving kind of in that direction. Or, there's other firms out there that are smaller than you guys, that are 2 or 3 people. They're trying to figure out how to make that next step that you've already made years ago. So things for them to think about it and to consider as you transition from kind of doing, working in the business to working on the business. We've all heard about that, but a little bit of what your journey has been like. I think it's a fascinating journey. I think you have some good stuff to offer on that.
Yeah, so basically make sure I'm hearing the question right, is really what is it like to transition from being a project engineer to running a company?
Sure.
More into a managerial sense. Is that
absolutely? Yeah. I don't think it's obvious to everybody how you do that and what that path might look like.
Yeah, and it's interesting too. I'll segue back to that with an observation from the industry, especially in the consulting space.
Mhm.
It's sometimes almost a ubiquitous assumption that if your progression as an engineer will lead you to, um, you know, someday, if depending on what firm you're in, to a
Sure.
partner role or to a given leadership role. And sometimes it will, sometimes it may not. And one of the big questions is, what's right for you?
Mm.
For me, that's something that I prayed about early in my career and felt like I had clarity, just like I told you earlier, even going to school. But part of that is going to be what your natural tendencies, what your natural skill sets are. There's times that engineers may end up in a managerial role, and they're really not equipped with the giftings that align with that. And there's times that an engineer, may be perfectly suited for it. And so kind of just delineating between, is it inevitable that you have to make that progression, or do you choose? Because there's really kind of two paths that I see, especially for the engineer, in that being very technical, a specialist, or a managing role. And inevitably, nobody wants to stay stagnant. So you either are going to advance in your technical specialty and become a high level expert in a particular specialty in a niche, or you're going to gravitate more away from being hands-on in the trenches of engineering, and you're going to be leading teams. You may start with a small project team. It may go to multiple project teams. Then it goes to departments, then, a company. And so there's really kind of two main paths, and that is getting deeper in your specialty. And I'm speaking largely from a consulting firm perspective. You're either going to become the specialist, or you're going to progress into a team leading capacity. And it doesn't really matter whether you're leading a small team or a large team. The dynamics are similar. They scale. There adds complexity inevitably, but it is a different path where you're going to have to wrestle with, did I love doing the actual engineering? And that's what I see some that actually have taken a management path. Really, they long for the days when they could just go back and do engineering,
Right.
or what they call engineering, just the more technical, did not have to deal with as many people factors, relational factors, things that you can't quantify in equations. You can't quantify in the traditional engineering space. It's this soft space. And so if you find yourself, man, I so miss just the simplicity of being an engineer, well, probably the specialist role is a better fit. And if you're like, man, I love these new challenges. I enjoyed it when I was there, and it's kind of where I was. I enjoyed the technical engineering when I was there, and I can still jump in and do those tasks. But I really do enjoy the challenge of leading and working through the human factors side of the system.
Yeah. That's great advice. I love it. I mean, it's one of the reasons I like talking to you, and I was happy when you wanted to come on the show, because you bring a lot of clarity and you distill things really well. I got 100% agree with you. And I see that. I mean, in our business, the recruiting and staffing space that we're in for this niche, you work with people that are top-notch experts and specialists, as you mentioned. They're good at one or two things. And then you meet other people that are, have those more soft skills, excuse me, like to work with people, managing teams, managing large teams. They're two very different people, though. But I think kind of that, look in the mirror and be honest with yourself. It goes a long ways. It sounds simple, but at the end of the day, there's so much truth to it. So, and I know you and I have had conversations on this particular topic, but kind of be true to yourself,
Yeah.
and
there's really not one that is more grand. I think sometimes there may be image or persona that may go with a role or an expectation, but if you strive to be the very best you can be in the space that's your sweet spot, there's nothing that's more special about another title or accolade or what somebody else thinks. You're going to shine when you're in your sweet spot. You will.
Yeah. You'll shine. The value will be there, and people will recognize it. They'll gravitate to you. I mean, I see it every day. Transitioning into kind of the next thing I want to talk about, talking a little bit about kind of, how you identified your particular path. One of the things I want to do is kind of flip the switch a little bit and talk about a day in the life. What's it like to be Jeremiah Bridges? What does a typical day look like for you? As far as, you get up in the morning, are you an early riser? What's your day look like? How do you kind of finish the day? And are there things, and every day could be a little different. I've heard that, my days are always a little different, but I don't want someone to get off the hook that easy, so even if the day is a little different, what are those elements of your day that are non-negotiable? I find in great leaders, there are parts of their day that are fairly non-negotiable as far as things that are important to them professionally and personally that help them get through and maximize the value of a day. So, take us kind of down. What's it like for you? What's the journey each day?
Yeah, so I would not claim to be, one of those 4 a.m. risers. I try to get up at a decent hour, and one of the first things I do is I've got a little Bible app on my phone, and I look at I've got to set up for some devotional scripture verses to start the day and really kind of try to get my mind set right into the day. Mm-hmm. And then the next steps are just starting to, prep for the day, getting into the office and beginning to lay out a day. A lot of my day anymore, as the size of the company we're at, it's a lot of meetings. It's a lot of coordination. When we were a smaller company and just starting, it was, jumping in. It might be a meeting. It might be working on a project. It just varied. Anymore, most of my efforts are revolved around coordination, communication. I have some design tasks, but mostly it's oversight. It's coordination with clients. I both lead the team, but I also am active in our business development. So it can be communicating with potential clients. It can be meeting with existing clients. It can be meeting with team members, direct reports. So there's a whole lot of meetings involved, but those are something that, as we've gotten busier, I've recently brought in a executive assistant that's helping coordinate schedules and actually working to group things, because it's very easy for schedules to become haphazard, and then it's kind of like budgeting for money. You can wonder where your money went, or you can tell your money where to go, and that's something that I will say I'm learning and improving in that space with my time. I can say the right thing, but I know there's times I'm like, I wonder where my time went. Yeah. And the aim that I'm striving for is to actually, assign things in a logical order that lets the time fit more in a budget, because we all have the same allotment of time.
Yep.
And we can wonder where it went, or we can work to try to assemble it in a way that's the most productive. And so, like I say, I wouldn't claim to always do it the best, but that's the aim, is to figure out how to assemble the time in the best order. And used to be early in my career, the slack came in the evening. And now, that was something that was much easier as a young engineer with no children. Yeah. Had a wife, but with, us having 3 kids that, are anywhere now from 10 to 4, that is something that is more of a non-negotiable, is to have, bandwidth for some family time. Yeah. in the evenings. And then what I'll make up is, if I need to catch something, it'll be after they go to bed.
Sure.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. No, that's kind of part of it. Yeah. I mean, they always talk about, that work-life balance. And I think for everybody, it's a little different because everybody's in a little bit of a different circumstance,
Yeah,
depending
you
on
got seasons in life,
Absolutely.
and
Yeah.
you've got, potentially an unmarried season. You may have a married season. You may have a kids season. You've got an empty nest season. There's so many different seasons that people go through that you can't prescribe a one size fits all approach.
No. No, I think the one takeaway I've gotten out of this is just even in my own career is you're right. There's different seasons. I think you got to be in tune with that. You can't hold on to something for 5 years when, 2.5 years in, you really needed to pivot because the circumstances did change and you didn't because maybe it was easier to I'm just going to stay the course, but the reality is it's really the wrong course at this point in time. So I think being in tune with, addressing what are your obligations and your duties is very important. And I think when you're hitting them, all the other areas of your life go well. When you're in work and you're using your time well and you're hitting it hard, it tends to go pretty well. And I think same thing true when you're at home. If you're present in those moments, things go pretty well. And the last thing you want, and I learned from a mentor years ago, is you want your people thinking about all their stuff at home when they should be at the office and be billable and be satisfying the client and the client needs. I don't need you thinking about all the other stuff. I need you focused here. And when you're home, you need to be focused on your home stuff. Don't worry about it. Come back to work and we'll engage again. So I think about that mentor often and those comments that I got early in my career that have really obviously proven to be true, but really proven to be helpful, be in the moment, everything else will take care of itself. But if you start neglecting stuff, then that's where I think the problems happen. So you get out of alignment.
Sure.
And
one thing that can sometimes be hard, but I was just at a recent leadership conference and they drove this point home that be present where you are.
Yeah.
And oftentimes we try to multitask and ignore the fact that really multitasking is largely a myth. There's certainly the ability to do lots of sporadic things very close to in tandem, but you're not doing any of them justice. So if you're saying, well, I'm going to spend some time with the kids and you're also sitting there on the phone and you're trying to answer emails. Oh, yeah, I hear you. Oh yeah, that's great. Oh, we got this meeting tomorrow. And you're doing that. You're doing neither a service.
Right.
You're sucking your time away, but you're not actually benefiting your family, and you're taking 5 times as long to do a task at work that you could have just sat down and done when you were focused, when you were present. And so this whole idea that I took away, heard it before, but it was a reminder: be present where you are.
Yeah, no, I think it's great advice. And I'm glad you're throwing it out there. I mean, again, looking at your role and what you do, where you are in the firm, where you are in the space. I mean, it's good for other professionals, on your level and professionals that are still coming up the ranks to hear this, because it's true. Yeah. I mean, that's where the justice element is. Yeah.
Yeah. And it doesn't even happen just with your kids. It can happen with your teammates. And, you can be on a video conference and really supposed to be paying attention, but pretty soon you're over on the other screen typing an email to something else or sending text messages, and pretty soon wait, where was I at? And there's times, if you find yourselves in a lot of those meetings, you probably need to ask, should I have been there? Do we have the right audience?
Yeah.
Because you may be in things you don't need to be in, but if you need to be there, then you should be there.
And you should be there. Yeah. Well, I agree. And I mean, it's just to the firm, it's just to the client, and to the expectations, kind of in that same vein. One of the questions I like to ask is, what's the best piece of advice you've ever received? And it doesn't matter. I don't care if it's professional, if it's personal. What's kind of rung true for you over the years that you can share with us? Because I think that's part of the genius of different people.
That is tough, because I love collecting advice and listening to stories and to distill it down into one point that's the best. And that's hard. I'll take one that
give me a good one.
The earliest lessons I took away, and I took it away from my parents.
Okay.
And that was a value of communication, how important clear, effective communication is. Doesn't mean it's always easy. You can say it's important, but just realizing how important clear communication is and how easy it is to actually not be clear, even when you think you're being clear.
Okay.
How many subtle nuances and assumptions and things lay in the back of someone else's mind because of their prior experience that may make it where when you say a word, it doesn't mean the same thing to them as it does you. And so you're like, well, I said the right word.
Sure.
Well, maybe not, because you don't know how it resonated with that other person. And so, that's, whether it's consulting space, whether it's life, the ability to communicate effectively is tremendously important. And that was something that, whether I'm always good at it, my parents always, taught me from an early age is that importance.
Yeah, that's huge. I think it's great advice. I mean, I can't tell you how many times, I like to think it's happened earlier, it happened more earlier in my career than later, but you get into a discussion only to find out 10, 15 minutes later, you're not even talking about the same thing. You may think you're talking about the same thing. I mean, the topic was read, or the issue was read, or the concern or the problem to be solved has been presented.
Yep.
But
almost
you're on different pages.
Taking that a step further, with some advice that came later. I don't remember exactly where it originated, whether it was an interview, podcast type thing, or if it was a book. But I remember very distinctly the last 10%. So when you're having a conversation and you think you've communicated everything that needs to happen, and say it's a meeting, could be about a project, could be about just a internal assignment, whatever it is. A lot of the important communication happens after 90% of the rest of the communication has happened. There's this space where the last 10% usually remains unspoken. And it's where you find out somebody didn't get it or had a different assumption. And there's a bit of an art to extracting that last 10%.
Okay.
It's not something I can just be like, oh, you do this. But the thing to be reminded of or aware of is that it exists. That there's a last 10% that doesn't get spoken easily. And so if you're you got a personality that is hard charging, you're ready to move on to the next thing, just get her done. You heard 90% and everybody quit talking. Well, obviously the conversation was done, but really it may not have been done. And so part of that clear communication isn't just one direction of you clearly articulating yourself. It's an art of listening and an art of helping someone else bring to light what they may have been hesitant to say, may not have even know how to say. So you kind of got to listen between the lines and be able to ask other good questions that can draw out that last 10%, because inevitably you hear this from different folks, the water cooler conversation. What's the best part of the meeting? What happens right after the meeting? Well, that's because that last 10% never came out. And everybody goes and talks then around the water cooler, or it's a pre-construction meeting and you hear the contractor talking in the corner and you're like, wait a second, they didn't actually fully understand what we were talking about. And you have the opportunity to draw everybody back to the table and say, wait, hold on, I'm hearing something. Or you can ignore it and, oh, I told them what they need to know.
Right. So you brought up something interesting. So how do you get that last 10%? I mean, what's the technique or the tactic that is advisable or has been successful, for you to get that last 10% so that, you leave the table where, everybody truly is on the same page?
Well, that's, like I said, it's a little easier said than done, because there's no one size fits all approach. But I will give you a fairly universal first step. We have a basic process of how we try to approach all of our work. And that starts with with the very first step, that's where I'm going to focus, is understand.
Right.
Everybody in our company, we talk through the idea of the first thing we need to do is we need to understand what's going on, where we're at, what we're doing, whether it's communication, whether it's technical, it doesn't matter. Understand is our first step. And I take it actually from a scripture in the book of James that says, be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry.
Uh-huh.
And you may say, what does that have to do with consulting or engineering? Well, it has to do with life.
Yeah.
And we're all human. We all have a tendency to be quick to speak, sometimes not quick to listen.
Sure.
And that really is the first step, is that be quick to listen.
Mm-hmm.
The art of listening is something that you don't find a lot of books about. You find books on how to speak well, but you don't always find a lot on how to listen well. And so slowing down to listen and listen for both what you hear and what's missing.
Mm-hmm.
So there's you can hear somebody say something, but you can also say, wait a second, what did I not hear them say?
Exactly. What's not
that I would have expected that they should have said if they got it, or if there wasn't another question on the table. And so sometimes we're quick to just go with the information at hand and not look for the information that's absent.
Yeah.
And so that starts with effective listening, just seeking to truly understand what's going on. And then obviously you've got to mix experience, you've got to mix other understandings, because there's going to be things that a senior engineer that's been doing something for 20 years may be able to read between the lines in a technical process that an EI right out of school may not even realize was missing.
Exactly.
But generally speaking, it doesn't matter whether it's engineering or whether it's project management or an HR issue. The principle still resides that just seek to listen well, see what's missing, and then it's asking good questions.
Yeah.
Because you don't necessarily want to call somebody out and say, I don't think you got that.
Yeah.
That's not a helpful approach to say something. But if you can ask a good question that will demonstrate whether they got it, you can help them and everybody involved in a very proactive, productive, healthy way, just with good questions.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think you hit the nail on the head, it's kind of how you tied it off at the end. Because I think that you talk about the water cooler. We've all been there. And I think what happens at the water cooler is that the filter has been let go of, and people really are talking freely, that they don't typically do in the meeting around the table. It's more of a guarded conversation.
Yep.
When the filter comes off and people can feel as though they can just say what they need to say, that's when they tend to lean into what you mentioned, which is, you're right, the things that weren't said now get said. And so I think sometimes in the more formal settings, I think where I've seen some success is having the courage to ask the difficult question that is predicated upon what was not said. And not that you're looking to make anybody necessarily uncomfortable. That's not the goal. But you're willing to hit on something that could become uncomfortable because it hasn't been addressed, and it could be a key concern or a key issue that we really do need to get some resonation on, because if we don't, it's gonna, again, if you're a 20-year guy, it's gonna hurt you down the road. So I think the courage to ask, sometimes the way I frame it internally to our team is, you got to ask the difficult questions sometimes, because that's the best way you're serving your client, and that's really the best way you're going to serve yourself in the process too, to align with the client. So I think you're really onto something there.
And sometimes though, you actually need to embolden or empower someone else to ask the question, because it's not actually your question to ask, but it may be you may be in a position to help facilitate someone else asking that question.
Sure.
And there's another step that I would say is foundational, because not everything is even a tough conversation. Now, it's not necessarily that these all have to be things that are uncomfortable.
Mhm.
It can just be things that are easy to dismiss or not think are really that important when actually they are.
Mhm.
And I think, kind of going along with that courage piece, that there's a trust piece.
Mhm.
And it's something that you can't come late to the party and expect to build trust. Trust isn't an instantaneous thing. You have to build trust repeatedly over time.
Mhm.
And yet trust is what facilitates a lot of healthy, good conversations. So you gotta be very proactive well in advance of when you want to get the last 10% out of a meeting or a conversation, to have already established a solid ground of trust with as many of the parties involved as you can. Sometimes you'll be in a new meeting, you've had no ground, you're relying on trust that's assumed because someone else trusts you and they trust them.
Sure.
But
Sure.
the foundation of trust, I think, is something that is essential in good communication, because if there's no trust, you're not going to have open, honest conversations.
Yeah, you definitely won't. No. And I think in the ways that, I've seen trust get built over the years too, is by someone, it's not always an uncomfortable situation per se, but it's that willingness to step out and to be different, or to ask that question that hasn't been asked, and to kind of risk it a little bit. I can still remember a project meeting I was in outside of San Francisco, and there was an attorney involved in this development project, and super talented guy. That was kind of his whole niche, as we talked about. He was the expert attorney and on the consulting space for developing power projects in the state of California, particularly. But it was always fascinating, some of the questions he would ask based on what he was not hearing. And I more than one time, it kind of felt like he was putting himself out there a little bit, but it was precisely the fact that he did it that got the team to sort of coalesce and see some things that were missing, that I think built the confidence in what this man's ability was to see through issues, that developed that trust. So yes, as we went to develop several more projects, it was easy when he spoke. Man, you definitely wanted to listen because you knew something good was coming, because that was the track record he had developed. But and he was very good at it. It's just a skill he built over a 30 plus year career of having kind of iterative successes over time. But certainly that was a component. So no, I appreciate it. What a simple question has developed into really thinking through. I think something that every company faces, every team faces, every meeting faces. It's not going away. This is not going to change. This is not the last time this is going to get talked about, or they're not the last time we're ever going to face it. So I think there's a lot of meat on that bone. So that's good stuff. So we're about out of time. I always like to say, if you got any final thoughts that you want to throw out there, but I think we've had a good session today. Is there anything else you want to throw out we haven't touched on or kicked on, before we wind it up?
Oh, and if you get me on another rabbit trail, you'll definitely run over time. I appreciate the opportunity to come on and have enjoyed our conversation. At the end of the day, whether it's communicating, whether it's leading a team, the other thing that I guess I would leave everybody with is one key importance, in my opinion, is approaching it with humility. And just whether it's coaxing out the last 10%, building trust, leading teams, interfacing with folks you've never met. A huge thing that I see sometimes in the engineering space is, I think I can remember being in a freshman class and sitting there and hearing the professor talk about, when you get done with your degree, you're going to know 99% more than everybody else, out there. And on one hand, we're going to know 99% more about engineering, maybe, but the engineering professors sometimes leave that tidbit off. And sometimes I think engineers may hear that and think, wow, I've arrived. I'm an engineer. I know this stuff. And
Sure.
And that creates rifts in various levels of staffing. It creates rifts in client relations. If a consultant comes in and thinks that they know the best.
Yeah.
And so almost anything that we will have talked about today, and almost any place else you can go, humility, and especially for engineers where we may have come from a prior environment that kind of elevated the perspective, humility is huge.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. I think that's a good way to wrap it up. I mean, that to me is kind of the undertone to it all, having those conversations, seeking to understand, as you mentioned earlier, listening. It all comes, from a place of being humble. So I think that's good advice. I think everybody could go a little further with an extra dose of humility. There's no doubt about it. I've seen it in my own life for sure. One last thing, so people watching this podcast want to reach out, want to talk to you, on some of the topics that we have talked about. They want to expand, or they've got some other questions they think you could be helpful. What's the best way to get a hold of you?
Phone, email. I mean, you can email me at jbridges@crossdiscipline.com.
Okay.
Connect with me on LinkedIn.
Okay.
You can call our office 417-859-4441.
Okay.
And somebody get you plugged in. So we're flexible. Look forward to the opportunity to talk to anyone that is interested. And so.
All right. Perfect. No, I appreciate it. It's good. Yeah. I mean, I could speak from experience. Jeremiah's a very busy guy, but I know he'll make time for you. So if you got questions or comments, you can reach out to him, as he said, on those various channels. And I want to thank you for making time to be on the show today. I've really enjoyed it. It's always having great, deep conversations with you. I always walk away learning something new. So today was no different.
Well, Joe, I appreciate the opportunity. This was fun. I wasn't sure what to expect, because this is the first time I've done a podcast like this, but it was great. Really enjoyed it, and I appreciate the opportunity.
You're welcome. It's been my pleasure. Well, I'll tell you what, to the guests that are in the audience is listening, if you want to spend some time in the hot seat like Jeremiah and talk about your inner genius, you can see behind me, energization.podcast.com is our website. You can go there, fill out the forms. We're always looking for some good, exciting guests. Fill out the forms, send it over. We're going through them on a regular basis, and we will be in touch. And until next time, remember, there's a genius inside of all of us. It's up to you to discover it, harness it, and share it with the world. So the question really is this: what's your inner genius?
This is the Padua Podcast Network. PaduaPodcastNetwork.com.